Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. My guest today is Bob Antone. Bob was introduced to me by an old college roommate of mine who sent me this text message that says, "Hey, you need to check this out." Well, I checked the link, couldn't get the link because it was on Nextdoor and I'm not a member of the neighborhood. So he's blah, 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 blah. He sent me this stuff, and it was because there was an article about the Oddfellows in Snoqualmie. That didn't really interest me. But I listened to Bob's music. So was it 10 years ago, Bob, that you released this album?
Yeah, so 20 years ago in 2002.
20. Okay. Mm-hmm. So 20 years ago, Bob released this album, and he played it at the Oddfellows Lodge in Snoqualmie, Washington. Correct?
Kind of. We had a tribute to loggers because Weyerhaeuser Mill
that's right,
made an announcement that they were shutting down the last of the timber crew. So we had a celebration that was covered in the Seattle Times. And then shortly after that celebration, I wrote and recorded this album the same year.
Okay. So that's how I was introduced to Bob. So Bob and I get on the phone, as I do with all my guests, to basically break the ice, say hello, see if there's a good fit here for a conversation. And the next thing you know, Bob and I are talking, I don't know, about an hour. It was supposed to be a 15-minute call. We end up on the phone for about an hour, and Bob's got all these other areas of interest here. So this conversation, who knows where it's going to go, and that's going to be half the fun of it. But Bob, why don't you say hello to the audience, and you tell them what you want them to know about you?
All right. So yeah, I live in North Bend, Washington, which is 30 miles east of Seattle. My wife, Laura, and I, we have an art studio here, and we live right at the base of Mount Si. My family's been in the Snoqualmie Valley for about 100 years. And my dad was born at the Mill Hospital, Snoqualmie Falls, in about 1940. My grandmother was a nurse there, and my grandfather worked as a lumber grader at the old mill, starting in the 20s into the 30s. I grew up with storytelling, folklore. My mom's side of the family goes back to old Seattle, 1888. But we have relatives all over the Pacific Northwest, many of them in Washington State. And as you can imagine, have collected quite a few stories and just all kinds of nuggets of information that it's naturally occurring when you live in one area for a long time. So, and many of them very strange, obscure, and I'm glad to go into that if you are interested. Yeah.
So let me ask you, so you're living in North Bend now. You grew up in Snoqualmie? Or did you grow up in North Bend?
I grew up in North Bend. Yeah.
Okay.
I grew up in North Bend. Mm-hmm.
So have you lived your entire life in North Bend, or did you ever, when you were younger, did you go and get the bug to travel and go somewhere, or have you always stayed close to home?
I've always been close to home, but I have traveled. I've been to Ukraine one time. I've been to, other states, other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as where I call home, yeah, North Bend has always been that location. I lived in Snoqualmie, basically the same 15-mile radius for, a long time. But I've traveled, yes.
Okay. So nothing's changed in North Bend in your lifetime, has it? I mean, it's still the sleep. I'm kidding. It's North Bend is like lots of King County. The growth has been staggering.
Yes.
Lots of changes. Lots of changes. So growing up there, let's start this way. So growing up there, when did you get into music?
I come from a family of musicians. So my mom sang and played guitar. My dad sang in the choir there with her at the church, Our Lady of Sorrows. Yeah, my siblings, all of them play music. We come from a history of musicians on both sides. So it came very naturally. Yep.
What was the first instrument you picked up as a kid?
I was in musical kindergarten and I played piano. Marilyn Haley, whose husband was the mayor of North Bend, she was my piano teacher, and I went to musical kindergarten when I was 5 years old.
What is musical kindergarten?
Musical kindergarten. It was like daycare with music.
Okay,
Yeah, basically.
cool. So my mom tried to get me to play piano when I was a kid, and she tried to teach me how to play piano, and I fought her every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of regret that now. But when I was, 6, 7 years old, I fought her every step of the way. Was that like that for you, or did you take to it right away? Did you connect with music right away?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And if you've ever been to this part of the world and part of the state, you know that it's very dark. It's very gloomy in the wintertime. And so naturally, you go inside of yourself. Many people find a way to go insular and they go into creative pursuits. It's kind of like a distraction from the weather. You find that sunshine within yourself. And music is one of those ways. So a lot of the music that comes out of this area, is very dark and brooding and intense.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally, people here have to survive. It's darker. I mean, you literally will drive to Issaquah, Bellevue, Seattle, and you'll notice it's like a whole different world. And meanwhile, in North Bend, it's this windstorm, and I mean, it feels like the apocalypse here. So it's a different climate in this little valley. Absolutely.
Okay. So you started with the piano.
Mm-hmm.
When did you branch out to other instruments?
Well, there's a family violin from 1893.
Oh.
And it came from old Seattle, and my great grandfather played it. And so in about 1989, I wanted to start playing the violin or fiddle. And I had seen the movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People, that Disney film.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I just loved the way he was playing the music, and those little people were doing backflips, the leprechauns under the mountain. And I was like, I want to be like him. So, so that's how I got started with the fiddle or the violin. But yeah, and that was in about 1989. So
Okay.
my first teacher, I had a teacher, and she was part of the Washington Old Time Fiddlers Association, Washington Old Time Fiddlers, and they preserve traditions in Washington state, especially square dance, contra dance, Irish, polkas, jigs, you name it, any kind of fiddle music played in the state. So she was a member of that. And then also she was Eastern European, so I also had some exposure to Eastern European music, folk music from Hungarian folk music, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's how I got started with that instrument.
Okay. So as we're recording this, I can say 2023. Mm-hmm. How many instruments do you consider yourself proficient in?
Well, I can play about 13 instruments, and then I teach about 6 of those.
Wow. Okay. So what six are you teaching?
So I teach piano, I teach guitar, ukulele, I teach violin, and I teach banjo as well. I also teach voice, or I, coach, vocal coach. I teach people how to sing.
Okay.
I think that's about 6 so far.
Yeah, I think you're at 6. Yeah. Basic math. I think we're at 6. Okay.
Right on.
So where are you teaching at?
We have a studio here along North Bend Way, and we teach right out of our home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a wonderful job. I just love to see someone who maybe has never discovered the music before, and they become a musician because of me. I feel so proud when I see like a 6 or 7 year old. You just flourish and become an artist. Right. Suddenly you've created this musician on planet Earth, and it's just amazing, and I really enjoy it.
That's very cool. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to break my promise already. I promised I wouldn't ask anybody about COVID anymore. I'm just trying to put that in the rearview mirror. But how did your musical business navigate the pandemic?
It actually fared pretty well. I was teaching at Music and Arts in Issaquah. I would commute to Issaquah, and I was a music teacher there for 3 years. And then when March of 2020, everything was shut down. And so then my wife and I made the decision to convert everything to virtual online. And so a lot of people, wanted to continue the comfort of music lessons. And so we were able to do that through Zoom and continue going. I think my numbers were cut in half,
Okay.
during that time. I think I went from like almost 30 to, around 15 or 12 or 15.
Okay.
But now we're back up to like 40. I have like 40 students.
Wow.
And yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. So it was, I mean, I guess the thing about the pandemic that's interesting is listening to how people have adapted their lifestyle, their businesses during a period where they didn't have a choice. You couldn't meet students in person. We weren't allowed to. You couldn't, if you had a restaurant, people weren't coming into your restaurant. So they found other ways of, serving their clients, which is, I find it to be inspiring when I hear how people have navigated it. Not that it wasn't super challenging, because it absolutely was.
Yeah, absolutely. And go ahead.
So let's go. So you started with the piano and with violin. When did you start writing your own music?
Let's see. I think I wrote my first songs when I was about 13 or 14.
Okay.
And I wrote them on the guitar. My mom is a guitar player. And all through my life, I mentioned my family and folklore and storytelling. I grew up listening to tales of, hopping trains, living in hobo camps, logging camps. My dad would talk about working for the Forest Service, building trails on the dynamite crew. My grandmother would talk about being a nurse in the old days, and my aunts and uncles always had stories and jokes to tell. I come from a very rich storytelling family. So a lot of my music was inspired by, I guess, legends, local stories, legends, history, heritage, not only from my own family, but from the surrounding community. So many of my early compositions were inspired by the mountains around here, legends, ancient legends surrounding rivers and mountains and supernatural beings. My grandfather used to share tales of invisible beings, like he would encounter almost like extraterrestrial or alien beings when he was hopping trains. He called them his guardian angels. These invisible beings would save his life on many occasions, and he swore up and down they were real. And very interesting, he also saw lights in the sky over the mountains. And so I grew up with so much of that lore that it naturally became part of my musical storytelling all throughout my life up until today. So
that's where the lyrical inspiration comes from. Musically, as a teenager, what was inspiring you with sound, not lyric per se, but musically? Like who were you gaining influence from at that point?
Yeah, it's a very interesting mix. Both of my sisters were playing piano at the same time. They were taking from Mrs. Lundquist. I took from Mrs. Lundquist as well. They were playing mostly classical music, but I remember hearing a lot of Rachmaninoff, and I heard a lot of Bach and Beethoven, Mozart. A lot of classical music was in the household. Every day after school, I'd hear both of my sisters practicing classical standards all the time, right? So then on the other side of the coin, I would go over to my grandparents' house. That's where I am right now, in the living room, and my grandfather would sing a hobo song. He would sing a song from hopping the trains or working on the railroad. So there was this rough folk music, this basically Americana. I don't really like the word Americana, but I just said it. Oh well, whoopsie daisy. Anyway, so it was this mix of classical music and regional folk music. So and like I said, my teacher was part of the Washington Old Time Fiddlers. So I was just going back and forth. You could almost say like a musical schizophrenic.
Wow.
Anyway,
okay.
Yeah, right. And then some of the jazz music, from the Seattle area, some of the early jazz as well has an influence. And so we can talk more about, the history of regional music if you want at some point. But
Sure.
that's
Okay.
one of my answers, I guess. There you go.
So it's interesting because I don't think I've ever talked to a musician who would claim that their musical influences was, say, Rachmaninoff and hobo music. It's a very intriguing combination.
Yes. Well,
yeah.
it gets a little more weird as we go along here, because the other influence, heavily influenced by avant-garde composers like John Cage, of course, love David Lynch, of course, love his film work and TV show. I was a fan before 1989, before they came to film here for Twin Peaks, the pilot episode. I was already a fan of Eraserhead. Now, Eraserhead.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Absolutely. I think I watched that as when I was 13 years old, and I probably watched it 200 times. And the soundtrack, the mood, the darkness, the surrealism, the dreamlike nature of that movie really influenced me, as well. Other composers like John Cage. And so the avant-garde element is very prominent as well. And sometimes during a song, you'll hear, I will purposefully create dissonant noise for maybe 5 or 10 seconds or less. It's just a splash of that color of the avant-garde will come in. Yep.
That's really cool. So now I can say Rachmaninoff, Eraserhead, and hobo music. I don't know that I'm ever going to speak to anybody that's going to have those three influences. That's kind of cool. All right. So as you evolved musically, when did you start performing publicly?
Okay, so I performed publicly for the first time in 1989. And yeah, so I've been playing out publicly for over 30 years.
Yeah, okay. And of all your 30 years, any memorable performances, good or bad?
Oh boy. Memorable performances. Jeez. There's so many. Okay, here's one. I used to be in a band called the Tiny Kings. And the lead singer, his name was Paul Hutzler. And Paul came from Baltimore, moved to Seattle. I think he still lives in Seattle. Been a few years since I talked with him, but we were playing at a location at Pike Place. It's now called the Rabbit Box, but it used to be a lounge. And so I would get a little crazy, during the performances, and everybody knew that I had this very beautiful violin from 1893 from my family, my great grandfather, that went back to old Seattle. Everybody knew that was the violin that I'm playing, right? So back then I used to have quite a sense of humor. And, at one point I still have a sense of humor, but back then it was a little more wild, I would say. I put that violin on the floor, and then I told everybody, I was like, watch this, guys. And then everybody was like, oh my God. And everybody thought that I was going to stomp on my violin during the show, like some rock star would do. But I basically went and I jumped up in the air, and I saw everybody gasp. But I jumped over the violin. I didn't land on it. And then I go, just kidding.
See, I'd be terrified that I'd screw that up and land on the family heirloom. I just, good for you. But I couldn't see me doing that. That is kind of a good stage gag, though. I could see myself being in the audience and, so, all right.
I was probably intoxicated at the time, or partly intoxicated.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me, but okay. I mean, because of the event. Let's flash forward to 2023, 2022. Music collaborations, things like that. Where are you drawing your influence today?
Yeah, well, it is a accumulation of all of those things that we've already mentioned. Plus, starting in around 2003, actually 1997, but all through the years, I've also had contact with a lot of the local indigenous music and language. And
Okay.
so added to the mix, and again, it's a splash. Every once in a while, there'll be a little splash of a Salish reference.
Okay.
And we've had a lot of, ceremonies here at the house, of all different tribes, including the Hmong people from Laos. We've had many tribal members from all over the United States, including we had a Navajo code talker or Dene code talker that lived here for a week. So musically, over the years, I've also been exposed, and my children have been exposed to tribal music, Native American music, and much of it Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
We don't outright perform it. I don't perform Salish songs, even though I know them.
Mm-hmm.
But at times during the music, there will be a moment when I'm singing or someone's singing, or there's a melodic phrase, and I feel for a second like, oh my gosh, I feel the Salish presence. Let's just say that for a split second or maybe 5 seconds.
Okay.
So today we have a band called Tinkham Road. Now, Tinkham Road is all of those styles combined that we've talked about already.
Okay.
I know that's crazy, but that's what it is.
Okay.
And Tinkham Road is an exit off of Interstate 90.
Yep.
And Tinkham was a surveyor and is accredited by accidentally finding the route over Snoqualmie Pass back in the 1850s. He accidentally stumbled across this area. He didn't mean to, he just kind of wandered through. And then he finished his journey through the Cedar River watershed. So down like Maple Valley in that way. But he stumbled over the pass, and some say that there were two gentlemen of the local tribe that were watching him as he blindly stumbled through the woods. And then they reported back to Falls City, and there was a longhouse there in Falls City, and they told them that they saw this person wandering through the woods at what is previously a secret trail. I-90 used to be a secret trail, a seldom used walking trail. So Tinkham Road is all of those things, including Bigfoot, UFOs. We write songs that celebrate our strange history, the strange history of this state. We have the very first Men in Black sighting, the Maury Island incident. We have the very first UFO reported Maury Island incident, and then also the more famous Mount Rainier, Kenneth Arnold. Our band performs at flying saucer festivals. I'm also a speaker at Bigfoot events occasionally. And my wife and I are considered paranormal investigators. So the music actually goes hand in hand. It's like a soundtrack to regional culture. And obviously there's so much here, as you know.
Right. So, man, there's a lot to unpack there.
I know.
Tinkham, the question.
Yeah.
When Tinkham discovered the way over the pass, was he heading east to west, or was he heading west to east? Because the way you just described the natives went and reported to Falls City, which is west. So I'm curious, was Tinkham coming from the east towards the west? Do we know?
Yeah. So the last time I looked into that, from what I understand, he came up over what's called the Cedar Pack Trail. We have our drinking water from Chester Morse Lake, used to be called Cedar Lake. Right above that, there is a trail that goes all the way to Yakima. They also call that the Yakima Pass. I believe he came over that area. This is all up for speculation.
Okay.
Yeah, because historians can't agree. But the last time I looked into it, and we were talking to some of our colleagues, the indication is that he came up over the rim of what would be Chester Morse Lake, down where exit 38 is, kind of above that, maybe exit 32, just came down the hillside a little bit, and then figured out, oh my God, I'm lost. He was coming, I believe, from east to west, trying to find a route over Snoqualmie Pass. And that Cedar Pack Trail was probably the optimum choice for a railroad and for later a freeway. But so he came up over what's now I-90 and then was like, I don't know where I'm at. The story goes he went back up to Chester Morris Lake, down into what would become Rattlesnake Lake. And then the story goes in the journals that I saw, the journals indicate that he went out the Cedar River watershed that way and out to Seattle that way. So that's the story that I was told. And I may, because there's so much debate on that, I may have that wrong.
Well, we're going to quote you on it. No, see, it's the whole history of it is of the area is fascinating, and the stories that people tell. Now, I'm going to lightly touch on a topic. I don't want to go into much detail because I think it is worthy of a more in-depth conversation. But I would like you to elaborate a little bit. You made the statement, and I'm paraphrasing, but the first UFO sighting in Maury Island, right? Am I, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So in 1947, they consider that the summer of the saucers. Now, June 21st, 1947, the story goes that Harold Dahl and his son, they were salvagers. They would salvage logs on Puget Sound.
Okay.
They were out in a boat salvaging logs, and suddenly, above their head, the story goes, there were 6 donut-shaped objects. They look like donuts. Okay. They flew over the boat, and the center of these objects were glowing almost like lava, and slag was dropping out of the center of these objects and hitting the water and creating quite a lot of steam because of the heat. And as these 6 objects flew over their boat, it started hitting their boat and apparently burning holes through their boat. They had a dog on board, and the dog unfortunately perished because some of the hot metal slag killed the dog. It injured either it was Harold's or his son's arm. I can't remember which one at this time. I think you can look this up online. Some of it's online. Anyway, they made an emergency return to Tacoma, and then the story goes that a few days later, they got a knock on the door, and there was a man in black standing there. And that is the very first popular culture reference to Men in Black is Washington State, 1947.
Now, I don't know that Tommy Lee Jones was old enough to be. Just kidding.
Yeah.
I've never heard that story ever heard that story. And so the fact that it takes place in Puget Sound and Tacoma, that's mind-boggling. And I would like you to be back on and discuss that whole genre more, but we're going to go back to the whole music thing again. So your band, is it, am I being proper when I say your band kind of celebrates the less understood aspects of our region?
You could say that. The other way to also describe what we do is creating civic pride. Now, every town, has a history. Every neighborhood, has a history. Every family has a history.
Right.
And things that they're proud of. And musical expressions in Washington State can create a huge amount of civic pride, especially when you can say, hey, this song came from this town. It was written in this year by this person, and you can't find it anywhere else, or it's very regional and very specific. And those are a lot of the songs that I like to, and we like to focus on, because it does create civic pride and people can surround that song. I mean, if you think about, songs from other states, Blue Moon of Kentucky. I mean, you think about, that's a good example. Just think about any song that represents a region and regional pride. So we have a song called little log cabin in the Cascade Mountains. And it was written by Harold Weeks in around 1917. Now, he married Hattie Taylor, and they were married out in front of the North Bend, Washington train depot in around 1917 or so. And then he wrote that, or bits of it, on his honeymoon with her. And her dad was the founder of North Bend, Washington. Now, Little Log Cabin is a great Tin Pan Alley tune, you know, and we've been playing it for quite a few years. Now, it was known, you know, 20 years ago, people had uncovered it. You know, Linda Allen, in her book Washington Folk Songs, or Washington Songs and Lore, Linda Allen had included that song. But now our band has created such a reintroduction, so people can sing along. People know the song like the back of their hand. So it's now living history. It's back in the constant play, constant celebration of that song. You know, and it's over 100 years old, and it's from right here, inspired by life in the Snoqualmie Valley in North Bend, Washington. So
let's talk about your band. How many members are in your band, and what instruments are being played?
Boy, it started out with a few members, and literally it was October of 2014. I did a solo performance at Sigillo Cellars in Snoqualmie, and the owner liked it, and he came up to me and he says, "How would you like to play once a month here?" I said, "I'd love to." I shook his hand. And so ever since October of 2014, once a month, I would return, and each time I would bring a few more musicians with me. So it started with 2, with 3, and 4. Okay. Then we had a core group of about 6 members. Excuse me, keep coughing. Apologize. 6 members of the band. And then there were times where not all of the members could make it to the show. So then we would suggest, or they would suggest, substitute players.
Okay.
So what happened were the substitute players came in and played, and then everybody loved the substitutes just as much as the core members. And so then we went from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 to 13 to 14. Oh my God. Now we have, I think, 34.
Wait, 34?
Well, they're not regular musicians, but we've had 34 musicians that have rotated in and out of our band.
Wow.
And everybody's fine with it. And I know it sounds unusual. Usually you have, you know, a band where you have band meetings and everybody's really serious and you're at the table, and it'd probably be a good idea if we had a band meeting one of these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just have this fluidity where people come and go, and everybody loves it, accepts it. I would say out of the 34-ish musicians, I want to say a third of those musicians are from the jazz community, jazz trained. I would say another third of those musicians are folk and bluegrass people, kind of like that, country, folk, bluegrass. And then we have other musicians who are classical musicians.
All right.
And all of these musicians come together and create music. I know it sounds fantastic, but it is the truth. Yep.
When was the last time you played there? When was your last show?
Our last show was last year. And that was in, let's see, it was in November, end of November. Yeah. So the weekend after Thanksgiving. Yep.
Going back to the end of November of 2022, how many performers were on stage that night?
Let me see. It was me, Ryan. It was four people.
Okay.
Yep.
And what instruments were you primarily using that evening?
Okay, so Ryan Donnelly is an amazing bass player, and he plays upright stand-up bass. He's very much jazz trained, but he can play, you know, blues or bluegrass or country or anything. He can play classical music with the bow as well. He's a very talented guy. So Ryan Donnelly, shout out to him. He likes to play Irish music too, because he's a Donnelly, so that's good. We play a lot of Irish tunes as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Ryan on upright bass. Then we had Jason Knight Jason Knight plays guitar and sings. He owns a school in Monroe, Washington. It's called Alderleaf College, and they teach people how to forage for mushrooms and, build a shelter, survive in the woods, track animals. And he's a very well-known guy, but he's also an amazing musician. He was one of the founders of the Wilderness Awareness School, and he's been featured on television, and he was a consultant on Captain Fantastic. He taught the actors how to pretend they knew how to survive in the woods for that film. And so he's a very amazing guy. He was on guitar. Let's see. Oh, then we have Camden Neri on the saxophone. Camden Neri, and he is from Seattle. He lives in Seattle. He's a jazz player. He plays tenor and soprano sax. What I really like about him is when he plays, I love both instruments, but the soprano sax, especially when we're playing turn of the century or Tin Pan Alley or Prohibition era, stylings, that soprano sax is perfect because it sounds like a clarinet. It's a higher end sax. So, and he's a great player.
What instrument were you playing?
I was playing guitar, and I was playing the violin and the fiddle. Yeah. Okay. And so, and I was singing as well.
All right. Now I'm going to tax your memory.
Okay.
You have a rotating crew of almost 36 people.
Mm-hmm.
You had 4 people the last show.
Mm-hmm.
What's the biggest number you've had perform on stage?
Oh boy. Let's see. I think the biggest number we've had at a performance was about 12.
Okay. 12. All right.
And then sometimes it'd be 8, and then maybe there'd be a group of 4 that would come up, and then there'd be 6, and then we kind of rotated and switch ensembles up during the 3 hours. Yeah.
You're playing for 3 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. Now, like going back to the very beginning of our conversation, or the intro, was that I was introduced, you had released an album in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. So Timberbeast Town is a crazy album, and it's not for everyone. A lot of people love it. It's the reason that I re-released it. There were so many people that came up to me and said, I really want to hear that album again. Mm-hmm. I lost my copy. My CD got scratched. My CD player is broken. I lost your CD. I used to listen to that every day. In fact, I remember a few years after I released it, I met a family in Yakima. Here, we're going to go to Yakima for just a second. Met this wonderful family in Yakima at the Yakima McDonald's, and my boys were playing in the play area, and we just started talking, and I gave them one of my CDs. So then, a couple years later, was it 5 or 6 years later? I got this message on MySpace. Oh my God, I just said MySpace. And it was this young lady, and I was like, who is this person? And I saw this beautiful smiling face, this beautiful young lady, and she said, hey, I'm Carmen. And then she said, I'm a really big fan of your music. Do you remember you met my parents in Yakima in 2003? And I was like, oh my gosh. And at this time, I think she was 18 or 19 when she reached out to me, and I was like, wow, okay. I was confused. I was really confused. Anyway, so then I remembered, oh, that's right, it was Diane. And these folks are from the Yakima Nation, Yakima tribe, and ended up having a nice long conversation. And then we worked with there was a program for youth with Nike designing shoes, and Carmen and her family were involved in that kind of thing. So Diane, the one that I met in Yakima, every Sunday, she told me every Sunday she would put on the CD, and it was cleaning day. And so this family, including Carmen and her brother and mom, they would clean the house from top to bottom, and they would listen to Timberbeast Town all the way through. It was their ritual every Sunday. They would listen to my album, And I thought, wow, that is just so interesting. So interesting. So a lot of people like that. People that were like, hey, I used to listen to your album every day. They're like, you need to re-release it. I was like, okay. And now that I listen to it again, my ear is way more refined. And I have had so much time with musicians that are absolutely, 4 or 5 times better than I am. And I've refined my ear over many, many years. This is 20 years ago. So when I listen to that album, I, as a critic of myself, can pick it apart and say, oh, I wish I could have done that better. Oh boy, oh my gosh. Yeah. But the thing is, the heart of the matter is, when you have something, an expression, and I encourage all musicians and artists, just release it. Just do it. Just do it. Even if it's not absolutely 100% perfect, if it's 90% there, release it, because it needs to be heard. And in order to grow as a musician, as a human being, you need to put your mistakes out there. You need to release the material. Some people sit on something for years because they feel like it's never good enough. It's never good enough. So I was like, I'm going to just release this album. I know it's raw. I know it's crazy. I know some of the lyrics are like offensive. They are nowadays. 20 years ago, maybe it wasn't as offensive, but 20 years later, some of these lyrics, boy, if they played them on the radio, it would be probably it would be a problem. It would be a problem. There's some colorful language. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
So there you go. And it makes sense, because we're talking about timber community nervous breakdown. It's like the logging towns of Snoqualmie and North Bend having a complete nervous breakdown. That's really what the album is.
All right.
So,
as an artist, here's a question for you. As an artist, so you mentioned your ear is more refined. You've been playing music for 20 more years. I'm going to guess that you're technically a better musician today than you were 20 years ago. You're more at the technical aspects of it, right?
Yeah, I would say yes. I have more refinement. More refinement.
Okay. Yeah. Would you ever consider re-recording a past project?
Oh yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. Taking a song that was written and recorded, say 15, 20 years, 25 years ago, then revamping it.
Well, maybe okay. You said when you listen to it, you can pick it apart. Mm-hmm. So what about, and I've talked to a lot of musicians. I've never really asked this question, and it is, so you've got this song and you've listened to it 20 years later and you're like, oh, I wish I would have done this, or I should have done that, or, oh, that could have been played better here. From an artistic standpoint, is it right to re-record something? And there's no judgment. I mean, it's not a black or white answer. But I mean, I guess the question is, if you picked one of your songs, would you ever think about recording it today using contemporary techniques that are available that you didn't have 20 years ago?
Oh yeah, no. And in fact, we've done that. So Tinkham Road, actually over the years, Tinkham Road is now eight years old.
Okay.
Over the years, I took songs that were from Timberbeast Town, this album we've been talking about, and we redid them and we re-recorded them. So if you listen to our albums, it echoes, some of these songs that have been recently re-released. So the re-release are like the original raw, versions. So yes, Tahoma is one of them. It's about Mount Rainier. We have Tomorrow Brings Another, which is the name of our album, Tinkham Road. That came from Timberbeast Town. So what's happening is that beyond music, all of these elements create a world. They create a place to visit. And you have characters, just like in a film, you have names of characters. And these names keep coming up. And just like Andy Warhol would take an image and then print it, several times in different colors, slightly different colors. This music that we're talking about in this episode is very much like that, where characters and names and phrases and melodic phrases, they keep reappearing, but they're somewhat altered and changed and tweaked, and they become their own world. They become their own language. It becomes a culture in itself. And that's what's exciting to me is after 30 plus years, it's beyond, being music. It's now a cultural formation or an association. I have slang that's regional that we use in our lyrics that you find in Washington history, and just keeps coming up.
All right.
I know it's a lot, man. I can barf out a lot of info.
You really, no, don't apologize. You really can. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump the brakes. I'm going to ask you some of my stock questions that I ask all my guests. And we're going to wrap this episode up because I got a couple other ideas where I'll talk to you when we're not recording and then get you back on, or at least try to get you back on. I won't make you commit publicly to saying yes at the moment. All right.
Okay.
So here's my stock questions I love to ask all my guests. Where's a great place to get a cup of coffee in North Bend?
All right. It's a very, very good question. Now, if you're a David Lynch fan or a Mark Frost Twin Peaks fan, you can get a damn fine cup of coffee at Tweed's Cafe, also known as the Double R Diner or the Marti. When I was a kid, it was called the Marti Cafe. You can get a damn fine cup of coffee there. And many people that visit the area, tourists, will find themselves in that cafe. And it's on the corner of North Bend Way and Bendigo Boulevard. Other than that, other places to have a really, really, really good cup of coffee, I would say Aroma Coffee in Falls City, which is about 15 minutes away from here, 10, 15 minutes, Aroma Coffee. And they are situated in a historic building that used to be the very first phone operator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And for the entire town, there used to be an operator there, just like in Little House on the Prairie, where they're, switching people in and out of the phones. Yeah.
Listening in on the conversations. Building. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right.
Where else? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So part two of the question is, I'm traveling. I'm showing up to North Bend around lunchtime. Where's a great place for lunch?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So the Iron Duck, it's on the corner, right across from the Sure Shot Pub, also known as the Sure Shot Tavern, along North Bend Way. So if you're at Tweed's and you walk along the sidewalk toward the east on the south side of North Bend Way, on the corner there is called the Iron Duck Restaurant. Great food, great atmosphere. Everything about it is awesome. Plus, it is very haunted. It's got ghosts.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Last question. And I have a hunch I know what your answer might be, but I'll admit if I'm right or wrong once you answer the question. Cake or pie, and why?
Oh boy. Well, I know that the predictable answer. I'm just going to tell you what the predictable answer would be. Pie, cherry pie, obviously. You already figured that one out.
That's okay. So, but no, for you, truthfully, Bob, cake or pie, and why?
I'm gonna say pie, but I'm gonna say lemon meringue, because lemon meringue pie, my grandmother, Ella Antone, made the most amazing lemon meringue pie. My mother also echoed that skill. And there you go.
Okay. That question, I stole that question from another podcast host. And I love people's debate. You can watch them debate mentally with themselves. It's a simple question, but the answers get really conflicted. All right. So for this episode regarding your music, what didn't I ask you that I should have?
I really have no idea.
Okay. That's great. Part two of that question, or now for you, where can people find your music and find out more about you?
All right. Yeah. So on YouTube, if you look up Tinkham Road, just like the exit, there are 2 full albums available on YouTube. You can find that on Apple Music as well. You can also find it on Spotify.
Okay.
Timberbeast Town, this crazy, album that we were discussing, can be found on Bandcamp. So if you just simply Google Timberbeast Town, Bob Antone, and it will come right up, or go to Bandcamp and you can download the entire album. But I have a YouTube channel as well, Bob Antone or Northwest Roots. And on that channel, I post, original songwriting, but also obscure regional music and unusual music that people might enjoy.
Awesome. I'll put links to those in the show notes so that people can just click on them too. So to try to make it easy. So I want to
Let me ask you.
Okay,
Let me ask you a question real quick. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That was a little awkward, wasn't it?
That's okay. It's a casual conversation over coffee. It's supposed to be awkward.
You'll edit it out later anyway.
No, probably not.
So out of all of the subjects that we discussed, as the host, and what was the most interesting to you of what we discussed?
So a couple of things stand out to me, and that doesn't mean that other things didn't stand out, but 2 things stood out to me. Number one, the musical influence of Rachmaninoff and the hobo music, that just seems not typical. That's not the right word, but it just a very unlikely pairing of musical influences. Okay. Which I find to be very intriguing. Number 2, I want to know which direction Tinkham was going. I want to know if he's going east or he's going west. And your explanation didn't answer it for me, which is okay because you don't know. But the point is, there's some, I want to know, was he coming from the Yakima side? Was he coming from Seattle towards Yakima? Or, what? Let's talk, because you described it as a secret trail that locals were using, right? They report back. And I'm curious, not that we can ever go back in history, right? Because we can't, but I'm curious, which direction was this guy going?
Oh, he was going east to west. And the people that reported back to the Longhouse, they were part of the Native community. So they were in Western Washington in Falls City.
Right. So they saw him as he was approaching Falls City then. Yeah,
the folklore is that these 2 Native American warriors were watching from the brush, and he had no idea that they were there. And they reported back to their chief and said they saw a strange man wandering. And yes. So that's the story that I was told. And that's folkloric.
Sure.
Some of it I saw in writing, but some of it's folkloric. So
it's just the history of the area, the history of the region, it's full of these stories. The Maury Island piece is fascinating. The thing that you mentioned, and I am purposely not talking about it because I want to get you back on to talk about it. But the other mention that you threw out the word Bigfoot, and that's an intriguing story about the area, about the region, the what I know very little about it. And but what I am aware of, and this is, coming from a position of limited knowledge, is that it's a very polarizing topic.
Oh my gosh, you are correct on that.
And I'm very curious about hearing about it. I've spent my entire life living in Washington State, grew up in the kind of the Puyallup area by Mount Rainier, if you will. It's been in the periphery. It's whispered in the winds, if you will. Right. And it's intriguing. One of the producer of the shows talked about it with me, hi Todd, how you doing? I would love to have you back on. And I was going to mention this when we weren't recording, but what the heck, we'll just do it. I would love to have you back on to talk more about the paranormal, I'll leave it at that, because I think, especially as it relates to our region and to Washington State, I am very confident that there's an amazing story or group of stories that could be shared.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then, leading up to that, or let's see, I could mention really quick, in April, I'm going to be a speaker at a very special Bigfoot event in Chehalis,
Okay.
Washington.
What, go ahead. Let's elaborate on that. What's it called? Do you know when it is?
Yeah, it's April 15th, I believe. April 15th, which I believe is also tax day.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding us.
Great. So anyway, so that's going to be in Chehalis, Washington, the Lewis County Historical Museum. The event benefits them financially. There are going to be speakers presenting information in connection with the Patterson-Gimlin film and other tales of hoaxers. So there's going to be a discussion at this event talking about the difference between what is clearly a hoax and what is not a hoax.
Okay.
And there is evidence that will be presented, and the revelation that day will be so huge. It's going to be so huge because that Patterson-Gimlin film is so famous. It's from Northern California, but it stretches into Washington because, as you know, Bob Gimlin is from Yakima, and so is Roger Patterson. They're both from Yakima. And we met, I'm not going to go too much further, but we met Roger Patterson's grandson this past summer, 2022. So there's going to be some major announcements, and I'm going to do a presentation about our local neighborhood here and the difference between what I can say confidently is a hoax and what is not a hoax when it comes to Bigfoot. So it's going to be a pretty solid presentation all around.
Is there an online website for this event? Do you know?
What I would do is I would look up Lewis County Historical Museum. It has not been announced officially yet, but I have the flyer. April 15th is the set date.
Okay.
But he hasn't started. The director has not started advertising or released it to the public yet. It's okay for me to mention it lightly.
Okay.
It's fine. But yeah, I don't think they'll find anything yet. But within a few months, you will see on their website, the Lewis County Historical Museum website. Yeah.
Well, Bob, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it. I am looking forward to doing even more listening to your music. I've enjoyed everything that I've listened to so far. And I'm glad my friend Ken thought enough of what you somehow, I don't want to say you posted it, but somehow it was, this introduction was completely because of, I don't know that when I would have stumbled across you under normal circumstances. So it was many thanks to my friend Ken Cadu for doing that. And then do you know Ken Cadu? He lives in North Bend. He's a new resident of North Bend.
I do not know Ken Cadu. I'd like to meet him, but again, that's one thing that I think is very flattering, is when a stranger, someone you don't know personally, likes your music or likes your art. It's definitely a compliment. So I thank you both.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too.
I did. It was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed myself. Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.